friends, Dave Paulides, CanAm Missing Project, copyrighted edition for our video channel. The executive producer of the CanAm Missing Project is Huck L. Berry. This is Huck, and she likes to go huckleberry hunting with us when we go picking. Well, it's a little off season right now. We're in the middle of winter almost. Beginning of November, middle of November here. And her big thick coat is coming in. She's a good girl. She's a good girl. So, this is a missing person segment. Thanks for being here. And before we get going into it today, I posted something on Twitter. Yeah, Twitter is something I'm on several times a day. And it's David Paulides at CanAm Missing on Twitter. There was a kill shelter in Southern California that was advertising a 3-year-old Great Pyrenees, looked just like Huck. And somebody put it up and said they go in the shelter all the time and they check out the dogs, and boy, the video they put up with this dog was just heartbreaking. And they hadn't killed it yet. And I put it up and I said, hey, if anybody down in SoCal, you're looking for a dog, this is your dog. If I was down there, I would go get that dog right now. And you're saving a life. First of all, my experience with Great Pyrenees, they are super smart. They are very loving, very loyal. And I don't know, Angie and I just really took to Huck right away. We never had been around Pyrenees before, but when ranchers around here in Montana start talking to us about them, they're just the dog. They are the dog. And Huck knows I love her. So, yeah, check out the shelters, especially the kill shelters. I mean, those are brutal places. So I was doing some research on missing people, and we came across this article. And a lot of you say, well, Dave, you know, dogs aren't going to stay with their master if the master dies. Hold your taters. Ran across this article just recently. Title is, Searchers Find Missing Arizona Hiker Dead, His Dog Alive With Him. Headline, Prescott, Arizona. A missing hiker was found dead, his dog alive and lying next to him, in rugged forest in north central Arizona 5 days after reporting he was lost, authorities said. Searchers found the body of Donald Hayes on Wednesday near Mingus Mountain after 6 days of looking for the 74-year-old Prescott Valley man, the Yavapai County Sheriff said in a statement. Hayes had called his wife to ask her to report to authorities that he was lost, which triggered a 6-day air and ground search. Hayes was advised to remain where he was to await rescue. The office said in a statement, quote, unfortunately, the victim decided against the advice and tried to find his way out, causing him to become more lost deeper in the forest, end of quote. The rugged area where Hayes' body was found was difficult for searchers to reach, but they were able to do so Wednesday, the office said. Hayes took his dog, named Ranger, with him on the hike. And the dog, after being found lying next to Hayes' body, was taken to an animal hospital for treatment before he returned to Hayes' wife, said Kristen Green, a sheriff's spokesman. Hayes' cause of death wasn't immediately determined, but the adult dog was more than likely very dehydrated and malnourished. Hayes said the dog was found. Hayes and the dog were found 6 miles in a straight line distance from a trailhead, but more than twice in hiking distance because of the terrain. He was definitely far, far away from civilization. The searchers included crews from 4 counties and state police helo. I thank all the volunteer search and search teams and others who gave their time for 6 days to locate the victim and bring him home, Sheriff Dave Rhodes said. Mingus Mountain is 86 miles north of Phoenix in rugged terrain. Point of that article, that dog stayed with that man while he was dead. That dog stayed there with him, did not leave. which has been my experience in almost all missing persons cases, unless when searchers go out, they never find the body. And then the dog returns, unknown circumstances. And I just read that because I want to give it to you as an example of the behavior of dogs. Now, whenever I'm sitting around anywhere, like I'm sitting right here, Huck's just staring right at me. Yeah, I know you're there. But the bond that people have with the animals, I think, varies person to person. But I think if you treat animals respectfully, lovingly, those animals develop a bond that they'll remember for life. I always grew up with dogs. I think it was a great way to bring kids up around animals. A lot of people disappear with dogs. A lot. Too many. All right, so let's get into this story today. One case. One of the strangest cases you'll ever hear. I know you hear that from me often, but it just seems like we're getting stranger and stranger in there. But there's a boy who disappeared in Louisiana named Robert Dunbar Jr. 4 years old, missing August 23rd, 1912 at noon. Now, don't turn off the video, because this case carries all the way up to the 21st century. Oh yeah, it does. And this is the bizarre twist to the story, so don't go away. The parents are Mr. and Mrs. C.P. Dunbar of Opelousas, Louisiana. And I played that. Opelousas. I've heard like 4 different descriptions on how it's said. I actually watched a whole YouTube on the various pronunciations, so there's all kinds out there. Now, Mr. Dunbar was a super well-respected man in the city, and he dealt in real estate and insurance. Everybody knew him. Everybody liked him. Well, in the morning hours of August 23rd, the Dunbars, along with 7 other friends, had a long-planned trip from their city, and they traveled 12 miles out to Lake Swayze for a weekend of outdoors and fishing. Lake was known for good fishing. 12 miles in those days was a pretty long way. Well, they get there, and everybody said that there's meadows that have been cleared for camping, lodging, cabins, and then there's the woods. And the common denominator is that when you're standing in the meadow and you're looking into the woods, you can't see anywhere from 2 to 5, maybe 8 feet maximum into the woods. Very thick. Well, at 11:50 that morning, the family and the friends gather, and the women are preparing lunch. Well, at noon, the call's made, everybody starts coming for lunch. Entire family and the friends are all there. As they are there, Robert disappears. They see him amongst everybody, then all of a sudden, he's gone. I'll get more to that later. But initially, the Dunbar friends thought he was somewhere around the food because he was right there. So they searched their cabin, they searched the woods, they searched the grounds. They got help from other campers in the area. They weren't anywhere near water. And then they searched nonstop till around 1:30. And then 2 campers knew that there was a 2 o'clock train that would pass by about a mile away. And on that train were a group of employees from the railroad. 2 people left. They flagged down the train. The train stopped, and a whole series of employees just left the train and came to help the search. And they had about 30 or 40 people at that point looking through the area. Word reached Fort Barre at 6 p.m. and they sent soldiers with torches to the lake. Now, on the 24th, the railroad superintendent was a man named Flanders. He was also one of the co-owners of the GRR Railroad. And he heard about this, and he sent every employee of his out there to search. And on the second day of the search, they had 500 people searching, scouring the woods, on boats looking in the water, everywhere. This made nationwide news. The next day, well, 2 days later on the 27th, soldiers continued on site, and there was some talk that started to get floated that this must have been an abduction because they weren't finding anything. Then on September 2nd, rumors swirled that a Negro woman had stole Robert. And the police sent several investigators to do that research. And Police Chief Huck, Huyck, and Constable Vince chased the lead and trailed the woman and a Caucasian child to Baton Rouge. And that lead was investigated off and on through September 14th and then eventually evaporated. They thought it was a good lead. They thought that they were onto something, but they couldn't prove it. And they lost the ability to contact the woman. Now, sit down, put your feet up, grab that almond croissant, a cup of coffee, and listen to this. On September 9th, Mr. Dunbar was interviewed by the press about what happened when little Robert disappeared. This is what he said. On August 23rd, just before we sat down for lunch, my little boy Robert, and we called him Heavy, was standing by the table. Now, the reason Robert was called Heavy is because he was a very stout four-year-old. Wasn't a little tiny frail kid. No, he was stout. And he was standing by the table. A man named Paul Maisley, who's a family friend, had our younger baby on his shoulder as we're all waiting for lunch. Robert was on his way to the dining room table and jokingly said, "Hey, get out of my way or Heavy will run you over," as a little 4-year-old is making his way to the table. And he's laughing, and he ducks under the table and out of sight. He was still laughing. He disappeared under the table. Quote, "That was the last time we saw him. He disappeared like magic." End of quotes. Okay. Mr. Dunbar made this statement to the press. 11 family members and friends were all around the table when this happened. Nobody saw him leave the cabin. He vanished nowhere near the water, nowhere near the woods. Yeah, I call that a very strange disappearance. But he's all around water and all around the woods. Well, searchers continued looking in and around the lake. And that's just what searchers do. These people are still thinking that, well, he must have gotten out of their sight, gone in the water and drowned. September 21st, a new lead came in about a boy traveling with a crippled man in Pensacola. Police sent out a team to research it. They went to the location, they found the man, and they found the boy. The boy was huge, nowhere near Robert's size, and he was 8 years old, so that lead vanished quickly. November 3rd, Mr. Dunbar employed the services of the best private investigations firm in the United States, the Burns Agency. simultaneously posted a $6,000 reward for Robert. And what does a $6,000 reward do? Well, first of all, if someone commits a crime, a lot of criminals can't keep their mouth quiet, and they'll tell others. $6,000 in 1912 is like $6 million today. Huge amount of money. And they were hoping that somebody would come forward, hear something, see something, or keep somebody in the woods looking for him. November 3rd, 1912, the headlines in the local paper, quote, disappeared off the face of the earth. And that was kind of the general consensus of how this went. Searchers kept looking around the lake, Swayze, off and on, not having any luck. Then on November 27th, it said that a woman and a boy were seen in Atlanta, Georgia. And the boy looked exactly like Robert. Robert's face was plastered around the papers of the U.S. Well, as this woman and this boy were walking down the street, a very prominent reverend sees this and stops him, says, "Hi, how are you?" And this reverend sees the boy and says, "Aren't you Robert Dunbar?" And he said that the woman jerked the boy away from him so he couldn't answer and quickly walked away. The reverend took this as very suspicious and tried to get police to come out and detain the woman. And this reverend was consistent. He followed her, eventually got a police on scene. And the police was questioning the reverend, and the woman disappeared with the boy. Well, that made big news. And eventually, the police contacted the woman. They found out that the boy wasn't Robert, and the woman and the boy were let go. Then the Burns Detective Agency made a criminal case against a man named Edgar Hooks, a Birmingham resident employed as a peddler. Now, Hooks was married, and police said at the beginning that he knew where Robert was. Make a very long story short, that evaporated into nothing. They had these going on, and finally, in 1913, they had a big break in the case. They had a young boy, same age as Robert, born the same month as Robert, that was with this family. Well, they went out and interviewed him. It was highly suspicious. To them, it didn't make sense. And they got the judge to put the boy on a train coming back to the Dunbars. There's a huge party. Hundreds of people on the railroad platform. The little boy gets off, looks pretty nervous, and eventually goes to the Dunbars and they take him home. The next day, the court orders that the original physician that had taken care of Robert examine the little boy to determine if it was Robert. Well, that physician was a man named Dr. F.C. Shute. He knew that Robert had a scar on one foot from being burnt in a fire when he was very young. He examined this little boy, and with 100% certainty, he said that was Robert. He said the foot had healed, there was some minor scarring, and that this was Robert. Well, the recovered child that was on the train was the supposed child of a woman named Julia Anderson. And she was 1,000% certain that was her child. Mrs. Dunbar was 1,000% certain that was her child. Again, both boys 4 years old, both born the same month. Both came from far different backgrounds. The Anderson child was born in a hut in South Carolina. Was given a very poor existence, meager existence. Lived in a lot of poverty. Whereas Robert, born into wealth and luxury. The father of the Anderson child, Bruce Anderson, was held in jail for kidnapping. He was charged, and they went through a process of putting him on trial. He was convicted of many heinous things. Well, he had good attorneys, and these attorneys kept appealing. And they got the case eventually overturned, and they never charged him again. And it wasn't a technicality, it was a big deal. So Bruce Anderson was essentially exonerated of the charges. Now imagine if you're Mrs. and Mr. Anderson, and your child was forcibly taken from you, and now you don't have him anymore. He's in the custody of the Dunbars. But in your own mind, that's your child. Well, the Dunbars raised that child like it was Robert all the way through his life. He had a good life. He lived a long time. And the family and the relatives of the Dunbars, as they got later in life, wanted to find out the truth about this. Because they read the description that Robert Sr. gave about when Robert Jr. disappeared. And nobody could understand how the claim that Robert was abducted could have occurred, because there was nobody in that home around the table when Robert disappeared, nor was there anybody around the house. Remember, Robert Sr. said it was like magic. Where could Robert Jr. have traveled? The other thing is that searchers said that Robert Jr. was wearing a straw sun hat. And many weeks into the search, they commented that this hat was never found. And if Robert had gone in the lake and drowned, the hat would have floated away. If he had gone in the woods, the hat would have been knocked off. Hat was never found. Now, my question on this, was Robert given, or was the Anderson boy given to the Dunbars because this boy lived in poverty and the Dunbars had wealth? And the Dunbars were missing a child? Imagine the Robertsons. Never committed of a crime, but lost their child permanently. And think about the boy raised as Robert Dunbar. His entire life, he's wondering who he really was and where did he really come from. Well, as we approach the 21st century, family members of the Dunbars read the story. Doesn't make sense to them. Nothing makes sense. So they decide that they're going to do DNA testing to find out what the truth is. And they exhume part of the body of the person identified as Robert Dunbar. And they take DNA. And then they take DNA from known family members within that Dunbar chain. Multiple family members. What do you think happened? Exactly. It wasn't Robert Dunbar. Not only did the court make a huge error and ruin the lives of the Andersons, They ruined the life of Robert, or whatever that little boy's name was. But the $1 million question, and I'm serious about this one, what the heck happened to Robert Dunbar? Now, this is where Robert and his family lived. And this is about a 12-mile ride out here to Swayze Lake. And it's not too far to the Mississippi River, where there's tons of cases. Now, this is what the real Robert Dunbar looked like before he disappeared. Now, we can talk about this and say, well, this could never happen today because of DNA. Hopefully not. But it really pulled at my heartstrings thinking about how many lives were impacted by this. And this is probably one of the greatest whodunits, or what happened in 411 history. Water happened right around a lake. Multiple witnesses, 11 family and non-family members saw what happened. Essentially disappeared under their noses. Hate to say it, point of separation. They said that once he went under the table, they lost sight of him. Something happened. They didn't see him go outside. Where did he go? Well, obviously they tore the house apart. He wasn't there. Always this one bothers me. So, I thank you for being here. You are greatly appreciated. And please circulate the story. Remember, some of you out there make very demeaning comments to me about, Dave, why do we talk about these old stories? They're boring. If you think that story was boring, I'm very sorry, then you just need to move along and leave. But it's by studying history that we realize that these disappearances have been happening for probably hundreds and hundreds of years. Kindness revolution. Be kind. It costs us nothing. And you'll make somebody's day by just smiling and being polite. Thanks for being here. Paulides and Huck out.